Well, I have explained that in various reports on my website and in the Gloom, Boom and Doom report. But basically what is happening now is that the fiscal deficit is growing very rapidly. This year, government debt in the U.S. will increase by $2 trillion. And in my opinion, next year will be the same or larger, maybe $2.5 trillion. And so the government debt increases continuously. Now, if you look at the way the Federal Reserve is handling its monetary policy, it is evident from its action in the last 10 years or so, especially after 2001, that as the economy began to recover already in November 2001, that was essentially the date, the official date where the recovery in the U.S. began. Then the Federal Reserve kept its interest rates artificially low throughout the period 2001 to essentially 2008. Now, when the recovery will begin in the United States, I don't believe that the Federal Reserve will increase interest rates sufficiently for two reasons. First of all, in order to gather strength in the economy, and B, because when the time will come when the Fed should increase interest rates, the government debt will be so much larger that any increase in interest rates by the Federal Reserve will, of course, increase the debt payments by the government, which will worsen the fiscal position of the United States. So I'm assuming that actually the Federal Reserve will pursue inflationary monetary policies when the recovery occurs, and at the later stage it may be too late to implement restrictive monetary policies. And so eventually I suppose that we will have very high inflation rates.
And just to follow up on that, Mark, isn't it going to be difficult for them to tighten the money supply when their balance sheet, they've expanded their balance sheet hugely, as many analysts have pointed out, but their balance sheet isn't filled with, liquid treasuries that are easy to sell. They've bought a bunch of crap assets. I mean, who is going to buy those from the Fed?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what my point is. I mean, both the fiscal deficits and the treasury holding of securities will make it very difficult to pursue restrictive monetary policies. And if you read everything Mr. Bernanke has said, and also what academics like Mr. Krugman and Mr. Mankiv and so forth say and write, then you get the impression that actually everybody's interested to create inflation.
Mark, as you know, since the U.S. detached the dollar from gold in 1971, the financial situation of the average American has gradually worsened, and that has become more visible in the past several years. At what point will the coming inflation and negative economic conditions begin to really hurt the average upper middle class family, say a family of four that takes in 6 figures annually?
Well, I think that kind of family obviously depends how much they earn, but the family of four is already in a very difficult position because of educational costs, healthcare costs, and so forth and so on. I think that in America we have to distinguish between, say, the top 5% income and wealth owners and the rest of the country. And by the rest of the country, I would then look at the median household or the typical household. And I think, like in Western Europe, the typical household is no better off today than he was 20 years ago. Whereas the Goldman Sachs partners type of people and managing directors, they, of course, are much better off. And the way the crisis has been approached, in my view, is that nothing at all has been solved or improved. In fact, in my view, the policymakers took decisions that will make actually the system less transparent and more vulnerable than before. And as Mr. Krugman says, the best for the world would be to have another bubble. I mean, what kind of a policy is that to try to create prosperity out of bubbles? He said that in 2001 and says it's the case after 2001. Yes, we had a bubble, the housing bubble, but look at the consequences now. So now he wants to create another bubble. That's the mentality of the Federal Reserve in the United States. And I'm sorry to say, it's not going to lead to prosperity for the typical household. And my view is the whole entire capitalistic system will totally collapse. But I don't know whether it will collapse in 1 year's time or in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time. And whether that collapse will happen with the Dow Jones at 100,000 or at 3,000, and whether we will have high inflation or low inflation, that I don't know. But the total collapse is ahead of us.
So what is going to, where will that total collapse end? I mean, are we going to see a new currency, like some kind of a new gold standard?
I think it will end it will lead to the end of the capitalistic system such as we know it. And before everything collapses, what governments usually do is to go to war. So they can distract the attention for a while and stay in power, and then eventually everything goes sour.
Now, Mark, I want to go back and talk about stimulus, and I'm just wondering if you could educate us as to ways that the U.S. government could have stimulated the private sector instead of all this government spending. What ways could they have stimulated the economy by helping out the private sector?
Well, I mean, the best would be to fire 50% of government officials, and the government could perfectly well run with 50% less staff, and then these people would have to go and look for jobs, and for the first time in their lives, they would actually have to work. And Congress could also be just reduced by 50%, and get rid of all the lobbyists and so forth. That would essentially be very growth enhancing.
Yeah, on that note, I was just reading yesterday that Michelle Obama has a personal staff of 20 people.
Well, I mean, I don't know what she does and so forth, and maybe if you're the president